Here are the top 6 activities that lead to a rotator cuff tear. Number 1 is being sedentary. Now, this tends to apply more to people that have desk jobs or computer type jobs. And the reason that I see rotator cuff tears happen a lot in this population is because they just don't get much overhead activity. It's just not required at a desk or computer job. But to keep your shoulders healthy, you have to take them through the motions that they're designed to go through on a consistent basis. And if you're mostly sitting down at the computer, if you just have a sedentary type lifestyle, then chances are you're not reaching up overhead very much, especially for exercise, especially with some sort of resistance. And that's what's necessary in order to keep the shoulders healthy for the long term and avoid a rotator cuff tear. A little side note to this is, especially people that dress professional. I'm not saying don't dress professional. It might be necessary or required for your job, but just consider this. If you're wearing a shirt that's tucked in, or if you're wearing a suit coat, the design of these clothes is restricting your overhead motion. I mean, whenever I have to dress up and wear a tie and tuck in my shirt, I don't like to lift my arms up overhead because my shirt untucks. It just messes up the way my clothes look. And so that's part of the reason why I dress this way, because I don't have to worry about that and I can freely move around not worrying about what my clothes are doing. But if you're in a professional environment, then it's usually not a common thing to be reaching up overhead. The second activity that leads to a rotator cuff tear is improper weightlifting technique. Now, I think weightlifting is fantastic for shoulder health, especially really for your entire body. Everybody should do at least some degree of it. You need to be doing weightlifting once a week, if not more times a week, to keep your body as healthy as possible. But technique matters tremendously. And one of the things that I see done incorrectly all the time when it comes to shoulder exercises is that people lock their shoulder blades into a certain position during an exercise. For instance, doing a bench press exercise or a chest press exercise, something where you're lying on your back and you're moving your arms this way against the resistance. Maybe you're holding a barbell or some dumbbells and you're pressing this way, you're pushing this way. What people will often do is pin their shoulders down against the bench and move in this direction. And what this does to the shoulder joints and the rotator cuff tendons is, because the ball and socket joint's out here and the socket side of the joint is part of your shoulder blade. If you lock your shoulder blades in position, then you're locking the socket in this position. And when you go to move your arm forward like this, the ball is forced to stretch into the edge of the joint. This irritates the joint. And if you're repeatedly doing that against force, against resistance, then it's just a matter of time before something becomes injured, usually the rotator cuff tendons. But if you think about, instead of moving your shoulder blades forward like this, then what you're doing is you're moving the socket forward and you're not taking that joint to the end ranges, and you're actually keeping it centered on the socket, which is a much healthier thing for your shoulders. The same applies to overhead movements. You have to make sure you reach up with your shoulder blades whenever your hands are going up, so that that socket moves into this position as you shrug, rather than staying sideways because you're pinning your shoulder blades down and trying to reach up. You're just gonna tension the tendons too much, you're gonna compress them and put some bad forces through your shoulder joints. Your shoulder blades should be moving and never locked in position with any overhead, with any shoulder exercise. Reason number 3 is avoiding upper body weightlifting. Now, I can speak from experience. I used to be a personal trainer before I did physical therapy, and I'm a physical therapist obviously now, and so I talk to many, many people, and whenever I speak to women, not all of them, but definitely more women than men, will say, I don't like to lift weights up overhead, I don't like to do upper body exercises with weights. And most of the time they say something like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not experienced with it, I don't want to lift as much weight as the guys, and so I don't do those lifts. There's some apprehension about doing the upper body weightlifting exercises for ladies, and what it ends up causing is them not being very strong in their upper body, which sets up the rotator cuff injuries. And they'll sometimes convince themselves, because I speak to these people all the time, that they do work out. They'll say, I work out 3 times a week. I work out often. I'm in the weight room lifting weights all the time. But they're telling themselves this, not fully realizing they're never really doing upper body strengthening exercises. They're working on legs. They're working on their core. They're working on other body parts and avoiding upper body shoulder exercises. You've got to challenge your shoulder muscles, and the shoulder joint itself and the whole shoulder complex, the muscles, the tendons, everything is designed to take compressive forces as well as distractive forces, and so you have to challenge the shoulder this way. Some examples of compressive exercises would be lifting weights up overhead. As long as you're doing it with proper form, you're adding compression to the joint, and that's a good thing as long as the technique's good and you're using the muscles properly. The distraction forces come from things like hanging, like doing pull-ups or other hanging exercises, or even just hanging and holding. That's an excellent exercise. And some ladies will say, well, I don't have the strength to do it. Put your feet on a step stool. Find a bench to put your feet on. You don't have to hang 100% of your body weight from your hands. Find a way to offload your hands by getting your feet down on something, and that is excellent for your shoulder health. You've got to find a way to do it that doesn't hurt you, that challenges you, and over time you should find that your shoulder health improves. At number 4, we have shoulder raise exercises. Now these exercises look like this, where you're picking up weights at some, usually in front of you or at some angle this way, or maybe even straight out to the side. They'll call this one lateral raises. I think this is one of the worst exercises that you can do in the gym if you suspect you have a rotator cuff tear, or you do have a rotator cuff tear, or if you've had one in the past and maybe it was surgically repaired. This is a big no-no for rotator cuff injuries, because at this level, about this range of motion right here, anywhere in this area right here, you are max tensioning the rotator cuff tendons. You're putting a lot of force to them. And so it doesn't make sense to work it out in that position, because you're just going to feed the imbalance that sets up a rotator cuff tear. There's other safer ways, much safer ways, to work out your shoulder muscles in order to get stronger in your shoulders without putting your rotator cuff tendons at risk of tearing further. Rotator cuff muscles are quite small relative to like the deltoids or the muscles that control the shoulder blade, and so what you should be focusing on is working out all those other muscles and let the rotator cuff muscles just stabilize. That's really their job, is to create stability in the ball and socket joint, not to be lifting up heavy weights in this angle. Number 5 is doing too much too soon. You might be doing the right exercises. You might be doing fantastic exercises for your shoulder health, but maybe you're doing too many reps in one workout. Your body's not ready for that. Your rotator cuff isn't ready for that. Maybe you're doing too much weight for that exercise or for that series of exercises in a single workout. You might need to reduce the weight, and then you can better tolerate that. You won't run into pain or any problems. Or another thing is that maybe you're not resting enough, and it could be resting between sets. Like if you're doing 5 sets of 10 reps, for instance, you might need to take slightly longer rest breaks between each of those sets in order to recover properly. Or another way to look at it is you might need more rest between your workouts. So instead of having back-to-back shoulder workouts one day to the next, you might say, well, let me put a day between those. You could still exercise doing something else. You might do some cardio exercise or leg exercises in between those 2 shoulder exercises. But if you're putting too much stress through your shoulder with not enough rest on the micro level, like in a single workout, or on the macro level, like day to day, then there's a chance that you're going to overload the tendons. That there's collagen in there, there's all the stuff that makes up tendons that needs to repair itself, that needs to recover. You need to gain blood flow back in there, and time is required in order for you to do that. Now, as you get stronger and you can tolerate more, then you should theoretically be able to shorten your rest breaks and maybe even have back-to-back workouts, but it's something that you're always going to have to pay attention to indefinitely as you get stronger in your shoulders. And number 6 is the biggest one. It's the most important one by far, in my expert opinion. People don't use their upper trap muscles enough. When it comes to upper body exercises, the upper traps, especially with anything lifting up overhead, you need your upper traps in every single overhead exercise. It's black and white. There's no gray area about this. If you're reaching up overhead, you should be involving your upper traps. And the way that I see this happen is, especially with overhead lifting activities, like let's say you're doing an overhead press, what I see people doing is reaching up overhead, and they're not shrugging their shoulders up like that. They're just reaching up overhead and their shoulder blades aren't doing anything. They're just sitting there. But if you shrug like that, it becomes harder because you're probably not used to using your upper traps, but as you adapt to it, it actually becomes more efficient for your shoulders to pick up the same weight which allows you to pick up even more weight or do more reps over time, and it keeps your rotator cuff tendons healthier in the long run. Now, I'm talking about weightlifting a lot, but even with simple activities at home, at work, your everyday activities like reaching for the top shelf in the kitchen or the bathroom, reaching up to turn on a light or turn off a light, those activities, because you're reaching up overhead, you should be shrugging a little bit to get there. And if you're not doing that on a consistent basis and you're reaching up overhead and your shoulder blades down right here, you're not involving your upper traps, then what you're doing is you're never taking your ball and socket into the position that it should get into to keep your shoulder healthy, to keep your rotator cuff healthy, to make sure you're using the upper traps and combat the muscle imbalance that sets up a rotator cuff tear. If you have a rotator cuff tear or are developing one, chances are you probably are not using your upper traps effectively in everyday motions like this, and definitely not in weightlifting motions. And you'll hear doctors and surgeons and physical therapists say things like, well, avoid overhead lifting activities. If you have a rotator cuff tendon issue, you shouldn't be lifting overhead. And that's good advice when it's painful, because that's the aggravating activity. But as it reduces down in pain and inflammation, and you can begin to move like that, you need to begin to move into that motion in the proper way to fix the muscle imbalance. It's not advice that you should be following the rest of your life, because it's just going to feed into the problem. And every time you do, there's going to be instances where you have to reach up overhead, like changing a light bulb, putting your clothes on, taking your shirt off and on. Those activities require you to move up overhead, and if it's painful to take off your shirt, that's not good. You would be surprised, and you might be watching this and have had this experience, you'd be surprised how many patients I have had that have come in with rotator cuff pain that began when they were changing their clothes. Now, if you want more details on fixing the root problem of a rotator cuff tendon tear, I've packaged it all into a program called the Rotator Cuff Tear Recovery Program. It's my step-by-step process on solving the root problem and fixing the root muscle imbalance, so that you can get back to doing everything you love to do, not worrying about your shoulder hurting more in the future. You can find a link to this program in the description below, and down there in the description you'll also find a link to all of our rotator cuff videos that we published here on YouTube, because you'll get tons of help just by watching those too. If this video was helpful for you, please give us a thumbs up, please subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of the helpful videos that we post each and every week. And please share this with somebody. Somebody out there you know probably needs to see this and would benefit tremendously if you shared it with them. And please drop a comment. Leave a comment here. Let us know any questions you have and what your biggest takeaway was. We'd love to get back to our comments. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.